Good morning and welcome to members of the media and to the people of Bermuda. I'm joined here this morning by the Honorable Attorney General. On Friday, His Excellency the Governor delivered the speech from the throne entitled Building a Fairer, More Stable, and Affordable Bermuda. This theme and the initiatives announced reflect the government's ongoing commitment to tackling the most pressing challenges facing our island and our people. Address the cost of living, strengthening economic security, and increasing fairness in our economy and the critical systems and services that the people of Bermuda rely on. Today marks the first in a series of press conferences and media engagements, during which government ministers will provide further details on the initiatives from their respective ministries outlined in this year's throne speech. As I said, I'm pleased to be joined today by Attorney General and Minister of Justice, the Honorable Kim Wilkerson, who will highlight key items from the Ministry of Justice. In the 2025 throne speech, it is a continuation of the work which the government began in November of 2024 and the promises that were made in our election platform. As I said in a statement released just before the reading of the throne speech on Friday, the government did not feel it necessary to reiterate every statement, promise, and pledge from the previous speech just 5 months ago. However, we wanted to reassure the public, as I will do again today, that those previous initiatives remain firmly on the government's agenda and will continue to progress alongside the new priorities outlined last week for the duration of this session of the legislature, which will run until September 2026. These new priorities come from the renewed mandate that the people of Bermuda endorsed during the election and have entrusted this government to deliver. Today, I will outline the measures we are advancing under the Ministry of Finance to support a fairer and more secure financial future for all Bermudians. Fairness in financial services is key to an economy that works for everyone. Too many Bermudians face unnecessary barriers when dealing with banks, lenders, and insurers, and this government will take action to ensure that financial institutions operate in the best interests of our residents. In this legislative session, the government will strengthen laws to protect mortgage and lending customers facing financial difficulties, ensuring that banks treat Bermudians fairly in their borrowing practices. The Lender Code of Conduct will be updated, and the Regulatory and Competition Authority will be empowered to impose penalties on financial institutions that fail to follow required consumer protection standards. Bermudians deserve to know that when they take out a loan, they will not face unfair treatment, excessive fees, or barriers to refinancing that put unnecessary financial strain on their families. Also, for too long, homeowners have faced rising home insurance costs with little transparency on how these premiums are determined. This was a key issue impacting many Bermudians that the government heard on the doorstep. Therefore, we will work with the Bermuda Monetary Authority and industry stakeholders to review home insurance regulations and explore policy reforms that allow homeowners to select appropriate coverage levels based on realistic risk assessments. The goal is simple: to provide relief to Bermuda's homeowners from rising home insurance expenses and ensure that they have fair options when choosing their level of coverage. Alongside these efforts, the government will implement the recommendations of the Tax Reform Commission so that the burden of taxation remains fair and balanced, particularly as new revenues from CIT are incorporated into Bermuda's long-term financial planning. These reforms are key to ensuring that the government has the necessary fiscal guardrails in place to protect our economy while making Bermuda's tax system more equitable. The introduction of corporate income tax represents a significant shift in Bermuda's tax structure, and it is critical that these funds are managed prudently. The government will establish a sovereign wealth fund and an independent body that will invest excess proceeds from the corporate income tax to benefit future generations of Bermudians. This fund will allow for strategic investments in infrastructure and public services while supporting the reduction of Bermuda's national debt over time, creating a stronger and more stable financial foundation for the country. The stability of public service pensions is also a critical part of our financial planning. With a recent compensation agreement reached with our public sector unions, the government must now make certain that our pension system remains sustainable for the future. The Public Service Superannuation Act will be amended to eliminate the growing unfunded liability, ensuring that Bermuda's pension system remains strong for years to come. At the same time, the government will fulfill its election promise by restoring cost of living increases for public sector retirees, which have been suspended since 2014. By taking these steps, the government will support those retirees who have served our island while maintaining the pension fund's long-term viability. As mentioned in the beginning of my remarks, these new initiatives I have outlined build upon the work announced in the 2024 throne speech, which remains firmly on the government's agenda and which we've already advanced key legislation or will be advancing in this legislative session. In November, keeping with our promise, the government tabled legislation to establish a new payroll tax system for the public service vehicle industry. This legislation implements fixed payroll tax levels on minibus seating capacity while reducing taxes by 40% for taxi owners. We've increased the maximum severance for long-term employees from 26 weeks to 32 weeks. We also amend the law to remove the requirement to pay payroll tax on severance pay, providing stability and fairness for employees in a period of transition. And in December, the government also passed the Clean Air Act, strengthening air standards and safeguarding our environment, public health, and quality of life in Bermuda. And as the throne speech mentioned, we'll be advancing in this session clean air regulations under that act. Building on this progress, the government will now take further steps to enhance financial security and affordability. We will, in this session, finalize the legislation to cap pension fees, which was announced last year, allowing hardworking Bermudians to keep as much as $75,000 of their retirement savings and retire with greater financial security. During the summer session of the legislature, the government will also advance the legislation requiring all banks licensed in Bermuda to provide basic banking services to all residents. Every Bermudian deserves access to fundamental financial tools, a bank account, a debit card, or online payments without excessive fees or unnecessary barriers. Persons must have access to banking, and we will legislate to ensure that is a reality. The government will also launch a financial literacy campaign to ensure that all Bermudians have access to the knowledge and resources needed to make informed financial decisions. As part of this effort, a financial literacy survey will be conducted and targeted initiatives will be developed in partnership with pension administrators, and other financial stakeholders. These efforts, alongside the initiatives to be announced by ministers in the coming days, represent the renewed trust that the people of Bermuda have placed in us and our commitment to deliver the change that they have called for. Ministers will outline how the government will advance key initiatives across housing, healthcare, education, justice, and economic development, ensuring that opportunity is expanded, financial security is strengthened, and fairness remains at the heart of our policies. The people of Bermuda will also need to be informed of how the government will fund these initiatives. On the 2nd of May, the government will deliver the 2025-26 budget to the House of Assembly, and the people of Bermuda will understand how this aggressive agenda will be funded responsibly and sustainably. The budget will reflect our commitment to fiscal responsibility, economic growth, and delivering on the promises made to the electorate, ensuring that the investments that we make today build a stronger and more secure Bermuda for the future. Now, I'm pleased to hand the podium over to the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, the Honorable Senator Kim Wilkerson, who will highlight the critical work being done in her throne speech. AG.
Thank you, Premier. Good morning, members of the media. Good morning, Bermuda. It is a privilege to stand before you today as we chart the course for legal and justice reform in this new legislative year. The speech from the throne, delivered last Friday, set out an ambitious and necessary agenda, one that is designed to enhance the rule of law, ensure access to justice, and strengthen our democratic and legal institutions. It is my duty as Attorney General to ensure that these commitments are translated into action. Today, I will outline the initiatives within my ministry's remit and their rationale. The law must be a living instrument responsive to our society's evolving needs. Yet, too often, laws that were once considered progressive become obsolete and misaligned with contemporary realities. To remedy this, the government will reinstate the Law Reform Commission, a critical advisory body dedicated to modernizing criminal and civil law. A well-resourced, active, and independent commission will ensure that Bermuda's legislative framework remains robust, equitable, and efficient. This is not about mere theoretical reform, but about addressing fundamental gaps in our justice system, resolving outdated legal ambiguities, and ensuring that our laws serve the people they are intended to protect. The law is built upon the principle of fairness, and justice cannot be served when legal representation is inaccessible. Legal aid ensures that justice is not reserved for the privileged few, but is available to all, regardless of economic status. However, our current system requires a fundamental reassessment to ensure that it is both equitable and sustainable. This government will therefore undertake a comprehensive review of legal aid to determine how we can best uphold access to justice while improving efficiency and ensuring that those who need assistance receive it. Legal representation is a right, and we must ensure that right is protected. Justice is not merely about punishing wrongdoing, but correcting miscarriages of justice. We have witnessed cases in which individuals have been wrongly convicted and imprisoned, their lives upended by failures in the system. To address this, we will introduce a statutory framework for the compensation of wrongfully convicted persons. While financial compensation cannot undo years of loss, it can recognize the harm caused and help to restore dignity to those affected. The right to redress must not be discretionary, but codified and guaranteed under law. Our children, particularly those in state care, deserve the most potent legal protections possible. The Children Act 1998 has served as the foundation for child welfare laws, but as our society evolves, so must our legal frameworks. The government will therefore conduct a full-scale review of the Children Act under the leadership of Minister Tanae Furbert to ensure it aligns with modern best practices, particularly regarding adolescent mental health challenges. With increasing rates of childhood trauma and psychological distress, it is imperative that our laws provide adequate protection, interventions, and rehabilitative mechanisms for children in need. We cannot simply maintain the status quo. We must ensure that our system is fully equipped to address the complexities of child welfare in 2025 and beyond. To bring the treatment of juvenile offenders into alignment with international human rights standards and contemporary research on adolescent development, we will raise the minimum age of criminal responsibility from 8 years old to 14. Any modern justice system recognizes that the criminalization of children, a relic of times gone by, must be abolished. We must continue to focus on early intervention, education, and community-based support systems rather than punitive measures that can irreparably harm young lives. This amendment is merely the first step in a planned phased overhaul of the Young Offenders Act 1950. Our democracy is a living institution, and its strength lies in its ability to adapt to contemporary realities. the government has initiated a consultative electoral and constitutional reform process, culminating in a report for the legislature's consideration. It is important to remember that genuine universal adult suffrage was only fully realized in Bermuda in 2003. Therefore, it is incumbent upon us to continue refining our democratic system to ensure that it remains responsive, inclusive, and reflective of the people's will. Additionally, with the conclusion of legal proceedings related to the Commission of Inquiry into historic land losses, the legislature will be invited to examine the report's findings and its recommendations. This is about ensuring justice for those who have suffered from historical injustices and addressing unresolved grievances with the seriousness they deserve. The administration of justice cannot be solely punitive. As a society, we must prioritize rehabilitation, crime prevention, and restorative justice over retribution. This is why the government will continue to implement the National Violence Reduction Strategy under the leadership of the Minister of National Security, Minister Weeks. This is a comprehensive initiative aimed at addressing the root causes of crime, supporting at-risk individuals, and breaking the cycle of violence that has affected too many families in Bermuda. The goal is not simply to prosecute crime, but to prevent it from occurring. Investing in education, rehabilitation, programs that provide for social services can create a justice system that promotes accountability and personal growth rather than perpetual incarceration. The legislative year will be transformative for Bermuda's legal landscape. The work ahead is substantial, but essential, because justice at its core is about fairness, accountability, and the unwavering commitment to upholding the rule of law. Thank you, and I will now invite your questions.
We will start with, thank you, Premier, thank you, Attorney General, for your full statement. We'll start with Jasmine.
Thank you, Premier and Attorney General, for your comments. I guess just to start with the Law Reform Commission, will that take any cost or funding to start?
It will. It will take some funding in terms of its resourcing, continuing to make the Law Reform Commission viable and accessible will require a website, a way that members of the public and stakeholder groups can make contact with the Commission. I have had preliminary conversations with the governor, and the governor is the party who appoints commissioners in consultation with the Chief Justice, with myself, and we are looking forward to getting it back up on its feet in a way that will serve the people of Bermuda.
Do you have a time frame of how long this all could take to get started?
The work has already begun, so I cannot put a time frame on it, but I can certainly say that the work has begun. We have a resource in the Attorney General's chambers who is allocated to the Commission, and we will be working with the governor to bring it to fruition. And we recognize that it is, it's been resting for a little while, and that's not a comfortable situation. So we want it to be operational as soon as possible.
Thank you. And just staying with the legal system itself, as we know, Sessions House has been out of commission for some time whilst repairs get underway. Courts had been moved to the Dame Lois Brown Evans building, which obviously has caused a big adjustment. But do you have a plan outlined of how the courts will be set up going forward and where we're at with those repairs?
Sure.
I will just draw attention to, I think, a notice that went out yesterday in the media that the Department of Planning is vacating from the Dame Lois Brown Evans building. So the plan is to build more court capacity for that building to house all justice matters, but we needed to make sure the department's moved out. Now the department's moved out, there'll be additional courtrooms that are constructed to make sure that there can be adequate housing. And I know the AG has been meeting with the Chief Justice and is well on top of those matters. But from the construction issues, those matters are progressing. Budgets have been assigned and the departments are moving so that work can commence.
Yeah, and I would simply add that the optimal layout and the resource needs are within the remit of the Chief Justice, but we have been collaborating.
Thank you. In terms of the corrections system, have you had a chance to meet with the prisons officers? Obviously, they had a number of outstanding issues to do with the infrastructure. Where are we at with that?
I have, and it is an ongoing conversation and ongoing collaboration. So I'm meeting regularly with prison officers. Members of the public would be aware that I did a tour of the facility not long ago, and this was the kind of, no cleanup for the minister tour. This was the real unvarnished tour of the facilities. So this government recognizes that there is work to be done, and we intend to make sure that those facilities are safe, not just for prison officers, but for inmates as well.
Do you have a top priority that you'd like to tackle first, where work is getting done, or?
The priority of the works is within the remit of Public Works at the moment. Yes.
Thank you. And just lastly, SCARS, as you know, is a child safety charity. They've long called for mandatory rehabilitation treatment for sex offenders. As we know, there's nothing, I believe, set in law that would force any offenders to undergo this type of mandatory training, which is recognized in the UK. Have you had any discussions with the charity and how you could progress that?
I am in constant conversation with Debbie Ray Rivers, and we are collaborating. In fact, she has shared her views with me about the types of sex offender training that could be available. We are recognizing that, for example, if someone is incarcerated and their profile is that they are a pedophile, that's not going to be the same kind of sex offender training that might be, that should be available for an adult whose incarceration is based on trauma to maybe domestic violence, for example. And so we are aware of those differences, and we recognize that SCARS is, and Debbie Rivers herself, is a great source of information and expertise, which is why, I have an open door with her and we are having constant conversations.
And speaking of domestic violence court, any progress with that?
Yes. So really pleased to say that the domestic violence court is coming along. You will hear a press statement from me in due course within the next few days.
And a question for you, Premier.
I like the AG taking all the shine. She's amazing.
Thank you. So as we know, a lot of uncertainty, instability to do with the U.S. and their tariff changes, et cetera. I wondered if you had had any talks with strengthening partnerships with other, trade partners, or if there's been any progress in that area.
So I don't want to get ahead of anything that we are discussing, but let me just state very broadly. Clearly, the last, I would say, 50 days have been quite an upheaval, and we're doing our best to make sure that we can not only adjust, but be proactive in these measures. At my discussions in CARICOM, this was a very large feature, the changing relationship with the United States. The impact on cuts in aid budgets significantly affect those countries, not just from an aid perspective, but also in something that is important for Bermuda, that is weather, National Hurricane Center, hurricane monitoring, et cetera. And fears about the provisions of those services and any reductions of which they may have. In regards to tariffs and more locally and the other issues faced with shipping, there's a full court diplomatic press that is happening and occurring. The fact is that, as I stated in my press statement, we don't do these things in public. We are aware of these things. We have been speaking with the United Kingdom government. We have our representatives in the United States that are directly engaging with officials in the United States on these particular matters. But as a government, we need to make sure that we're also proactive in examining all particular options. The cabinet will have a briefing for the Minister of National Security, who is responsible for food security. It is on our agenda for discussion tomorrow. We are taking into account all possible avenues of whether or not there may need to be a change in the way in which we do things, but it's probably too premature. We need to let the process of the United States finish, see as it progresses, see where that is, but we will certainly have any type of contingencies in place, and I'll be able to speak more on that in the coming days, but I don't want to get ahead of myself before matters are confirmed with other places.
Are you worried at all or optimistic? How are you feeling?
So here's the thing. I mean, uncertainty is never a good thing. For a country that has been through a significant challenge with cost of living, any fears or possibilities of increased costs again is certainly not something that the government would welcome. But I have confidence in the government. I have confidence in the public service. I have confidence in our private sector working with us, with our overseas officials who are liaising on these particular matters. And I know that we will be ready to face anything which may come. That's reality. I mean, in the last 7 years, I've had to deal with all manner of crises, whether that comes from a pandemic to changes in taxes to different approaches, the European Union, et cetera. The government knows how to handle these crises. We're going to be methodical. We're going to walk through it. We're not going to get ahead of ourselves. We're going to plan for contingencies and to share information with the public when it is necessary to do so. But we have been working with the various shipping agencies and others to make sure that we're prepared for any changes which may come.
Thank you. I think it's enough for me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jasmine. Now I'll turn it over to Mr. Sullivan from the World Gazette. So, do you have some questions for the field for the Premier and the Attorney General?
So good morning. I just have a question or two for the Premier. You mentioned cost of living. On Friday, the governor mentioned that there could be cost of living, tweaking of the Cost of Living Commission Act to cushion the effect of costs on residents. How does the government plan to go about doing this?
Well, I think that it's important. Cost of living is something that is on the minds of every resident, and not just residents, it's also business. When we're talking about a corporate income tax environment where Bermuda has to be competitive, and one of our biggest challenges is the cost of living and cost of doing business, it is essential that we are doing everything in our power to ensure that consumers are being treated fairly and that all segments of society are doing their part to ensure that Bermuda is competitive. The changes that are mentioned inside of the Cost of Living Act come from the fact that the Cost of Living Commission does not have the necessary powers currently to ensure that consumers are being treated fairly, to ensure that duty reductions are being passed on, to ensure that there is not price gouging that is taking place, whether at the transport level, whether at the wholesale level, or whether at the retail level. And it is important for us to make sure we have that information. If you do not have the information, you cannot make those decisions. And I believe that we are at a space now where we need to make sure that we have that information so we can make those decisions properly. I'll just give you an example. In the Ministry of Finance, persons come and they ask for rate increases for things which are, I would say, that are capped by the Ministry of Finance, and permission needs to be sought. My standard practice has been whenever these requests come in, we ask for financials. The particular company that was requesting an increase presented financials. Do you know what their operating profit was? 38%. But yet they were still asking for increases in costs. This is the way that Bermuda has existed and operated, and we are determined to use the power of law to change that, to give the Cost of Living Commission the power to make sure to look, to examine, and to make sure that the people of Bermuda get a fair shake. Because it's not just the citizens of the country, our business future and our international business future depends on us being competitive in an environment where 15% is the new zero.
Would this conflict in any way with the Personal Information Protection Act?
I can assure you that the Attorney General will make sure that the laws are written inconsistent with everything. But this is not around personal information. This is around persons that are involved in the supply of essential goods. Let's be clear, Belco is fully regulated, fully transparent. We note and understand all of their expenses when we're talking about fuels, which is something that has been brought in, when we're looking at and telecommunications. All these matters are transparent. But those are things which are a small part of household budgets. You cannot survive without food. You cannot survive without essentials. And it is important that we understand the dynamics which are happening so we can have that information so the government can take its necessary actions, and also the sunlight of scrutiny, public scrutiny, which is often given to the government, can also apply to persons that are involved in the supply of essential goods. The price of food in this country is too high. We're going to do more to see if we can tackle it, and we must give the bodies responsible the requisite powers to get that information so the people of this country can be treated fairly.
Mr. Burt, you mentioned the setting up of a sovereign wealth fund for the corporate income tax regime. How is this going to play out? Is there going to be a committee or a commission set up to oversee that fund?
Well, the throne speech lays out what our legislative plan is going to be until September 2026. We are expecting a report from the Tax Reform Commission to come to us this summer, and we will take the time to examine their recommendations. But we know one of the recommendations, which will come from the consultants and also the Tax Reform Commission, is how are we going to manage these excess revenues? As Bermuda is moving from a place of budget deficits to expected budget surpluses, we are going now need to look at how we manage the sinking fund in the Government Loans Act, the transition to having a stabilization fund to manage these taxes as they vary, and also a sovereign wealth fund to deal with how we manage these excess revenues in the future. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait for the report of the Tax Reform Commission around those items, and it's important to know that this speech covers all the work that's going to take place up until September 2026. But there's no question that it will have an independent committee, just like the Public Funds Investment Committee. Basically, as the AG had mentioned when we were talking about the Young Offenders Act from 1950, the Public Funds Act is from 1954. There are a number of things that have to be updated to make sure we're taking into account the new realities. So we're talking about the Government Loans Act, the Public Funds Act, all those things will need to be amalgamated so we can have something that makes sense going forward in an era of corporate income tax.
In the government's, the PLP's platform, mention was made of the dropping of termination of pregnancy from the criminal code. Is this something that is on your calendar for this year, or how soon can we expect that?
It is. It is on the calendar. It was in the throne speech, and it is on the calendar for this year, yes.
Right.
Members of the media, I thank you for your participation this morning. That concludes our press review. Do you have any last words that you'd like to share with the public and the media before we wind this down?
The only thing is I'll say is I'm thrilled to have the Attorney General join me today. She has clearly laid out what we're going to be doing on the justice side, and I'll ask members of the public to continue to stay tuned to the information that will come out from ministers, engagements, whether it be on radio, television, online, to make sure that you learn more about what's in the throne speech. And you can always visit the government's website, gov.bm, to get a copy and read a copy of the throne speech. And of course, we'll make sure that highlights are delivered to your mailbox so that you can understand all of what your government has planned for you. Thank you and have a wonderful day.